Fate Graphite, our protagonist, stands on the duty of guarding a gate while wearing worn-down clothes and having his stomach growl with hunger. Fate curses himself for being pathetic to worry about his hunger while the warriors pass by, talking about their hunts. His gluttony skill never has his stomach full, and the only consolidation he has for himself is that he's at least got a job. The happy town goes dead silent the moment the Vlerick siblings enter the market. The terror of their presence is something they all seem to be proud of. Their attitude is so sick that they start threatening to kill a man just because a piece of bread fell from his stall and rolled down to Hardo Vlerick's feet. Hardo and Mimile threaten the man with the punishment of execution might, but Raphael, the third sibling, stopped them, leaving the man with a warning. Even the warriors from before are annoyed at these holy knights and wonder how Lady Roxy belongs to the category of these people. The three menaces walk up to an exhausted Fate. Raphael throws him some coins on the ground for completing his job, while Fate has no choice but to accept them to feed his growling stomach. But misery seems not to be the ending for Fate, as Hardo steps on his hand and keeps putting pressure on him, with the excuse of not noticing a nobody like Fate. Raphael insults and kicks Fate for embarrassing them, with the weird noises of his stomach as if they don't feed him. Fate curses his life yet again, while being punched for being associated with the people who do not have any interesting skills, the have-nots. The three brag about doing a lot of favors to him, while it's pretty obvious the favors mean bruises. Hardo slams his foot on poor Fate's face and keeps asking him to stand up for his sick amusement, while the three also wonder about some other punishments they could give to Fate just for merely existing. He finally receives his teeny amount of luck as Roxy appears, stopping them from abusing a citizen as a holy knight. She even criticizes them for not doing their duty of watching the gate, but the three think it's a good excuse to say they are instead fulfilling the duty of giving jobs to the have-nots like Fate. Raphael decides to admit the situation and have the other two leave too, but Fate notices him clenching his teeth in annoyance and hatred towards Fate. Roxy tries to help Fate by treating his wounds, but he gets nervous thinking about getting Roxy involved and how the three knights could kill him for no reason. Roxy takes his place on guard duty and curtly tells him to inform her if any such thing happens again. Poor Fate is so used to the abuse that he tells her not to worry about something so normal. After filling his stomach, Fate once again worries about not wanting Roxy involved in this matter, while the bartender worries about Fate's beaten up state, hoping he doesn't end up like the other workers of the Vlericks. While walking back, Fate notices some intruder in the castle and rushes to inform Roxy about it. Roxy tells him to guard the gate while she goes to catch the intruder. Fate waits, looking at the darkness and hearing the clanking of swords. The sudden silence makes him think Roxy defeated the intruder, but to his shock, the intruder comes running towards the gate. Fate thinks he owes it to Roxy to help her, and in panic, he forwards his spear right through the intruder's chest, killing him. This murder makes a voice appear in his head that informs him about the activation of his skills. This suddenly updates his stats and introduces the skills of telepathy and identity. A confused and shocked Fate does not think much about the voice until Roxy, who comes running to him, holds his hands in worry, and he starts hearing her thoughts about her concern for him. He drops his hands after the second time he hears her thoughts. Roxy tells him she'll report the incident to the higher-ups and assures him he'll get the credits for it, even though he tells her he doesn't want it, as Raphael may cause problems for both of them. Roxy convinces him to leave the Vlericks and work for her, which he accepts after a little hesitation. At night, Fate is confused about his stats increasing, but eventually becomes happy about thoughts of defeating monsters. The next day, he goes to buy a sword for himself. The happy owner of the shop is annoyed that this guy only got 2 silver coins, and points at the cheap stash of swords for Fate to choose from. Innocent Fate is still not offended, as he'd saved his coins for buying something valuable, and he finally gets to use them. After surfing around, Fate picks up a black sword that suddenly starts talking to him. The sword tells him it's a perfect partner for his gluttony skill, since they have a lot in common. Instead of freaking out, Fate decides to buy the sword. Mimile is offended at Roxy for stealing their servant, but Raphael tells her to drop it. She expresses her anger for Roxy pointing out their lack of responsibility, but Raphael reminds her that the Heart and Vlericks need to keep their relations stable, as they are the 5 greatest families in the kingdom. Fate walks outside while talking to his sword, when a goblin suddenly jumps at Fate. He timely uses his sword and saves himself, but more goblins keep coming one after the other. This gives Fate good training and skill improvement, while simultaneously finally removing his never-ending hunger. The sword tells him that Gluttony allows him to steal the skills of whoever he hunts. It also assures that Fate has finally got a partner and tells him to collect the goblin ears for bounty. Fate is delighted to earn 3 silver and 8 bronze coins in exchange for the ears and enjoys meat for his dinner, which offends his sword for not getting it maintained with that money. Fate suddenly bumps into a man and notices him suspiciously dragging a little girl with him. He follows the guy who turns out to have kidnapped the girl to sell her to some holy knights. We transition to the caretaker of an orphanage, telling the kids there about their god, Laplace, who grants special skills to people, and they should thank her. But one of the kids thinks it's quite unfair of that god to grant good skills to some and weaker ones to others. After consoling him, the woman worries about Sahara, the little girl whom Fate saw getting kidnapped. The kidnapper tries to intimidate Sahara by kicking the pole above her head continuously. Sahara cries over her situation as the guy leaves, but Fate comes to her rescue and opens her chains. He's about to move her to safety. However, the kidnapper comes back, mocking Fate for his stupidity of putting his life in danger for some weird sense of justice. Fate takes his sword out, but is also aware that he needs to get Sahara to safety before getting into violence. His sword, Greed, suggests that he uses the kidnapper's overconfidence in thinking Fate is weak and backing away. This would get Sahara to some safe corner, as well as get Fate a good opening to attack. Fate hides behind some boxes and launches the goon at Greed's queue, but Greed realizes they need to end this quickly after observing the sharp-edged sword in the opponent's hands. He asks Fate to strike through the guy's sword, which works quite well, since the sword breaks, thrashing the guy and rendering him defenseless. Fate stabs his sword in the kidnapper's wounds and tortures him to spit out the name of the holy knight who hired him. The guy resists initially, but when the pain gets unbearable, he spits out the name of Hardo Vlerick. As Fate and Sahara walk back, Sahara's stomach growls, and who could know that sound better than the ever-so-hungry Fate? He laughs while taking to the thought of treating her to something. He buys her some meat, which she hurriedly takes a bite of in thought of her hunger and desire to try meat for the first time. Her eyes tear up involuntarily, making Fate give her his portion of food too. He then takes her back to the orphanage, and being thanked for the first time in his life shocks him a little. He tells Sahara that he's gotten wasted for his skill, and all he has is hunger because of it. He encourages Sahara by telling her that if she gains the ability to laugh off the hurdles in her life, she's bound to attain happiness one day. This was something his father used to tell him, and somehow that helped him survive until this point, which is why he wants Sahara to survive too. While walking back, Greed congratulates him for attaining his first technical skill, the one-handed sword technique. The details make him realize that he would have been done for if the guy's sharp edge had landed on him. Fate thinks that he wants to get strong enough to ensure his victory without getting lucky. Greed interrupts his thoughts by asking if he intends on starting his job for the Hearts dressed the way he is. Dramatic, Fate drops his sword, holding his head that he forgot about it. Greed seems to be offended at being dropped just for the antics. A man talks to the bartender about Sir Mason of the Hart family dying on his hunt, leaving Roxy to take charge as a successor, as they think only she can't handle knights like the Vlericks. They think of how Fate must be doing, as he didn't drop by the bar like he normally does. Fate arrives at the Hart's residence dressed up quite nicely, while being in awe of how huge and elegant the place is. He's even more swayed by the sight of Roxy elegantly walking toward him. She greets him by taking him to her father's grave and informing him about losing him a few days ago. During his hunt, a divine dragon that hadn't left his cave for thousands of years appeared, killing him. Fate feels guilty for having her care for him while she went through this pain. Roxy forwards her hand to shake in the hopes of having good work with him, but he hesitates about reading her thoughts again. Luckily, a maid walks over, diverting Roxy's attention. The chief maid, Haru, introduces herself, expecting Fate to be on his best behavior while serving the Hearts. Her hopes, however, shatter the moment Fate receives meat for lunch and starts eating it like a kid. After a week, Fate seems to be working hard and blending in well with some of the other servants. His stomach growls in front of 2 other serving men, making him use the excuse of it being a growth spurt since everyone knows that they just had lunch. Fate is called by Roxy, and she starts talking to him about how his work is going, but all Fate can think about is his confusingly increasing hunger. She calls him Faye, which is a nickname his father used to call him by. This surprises him, but Roxy believes in having everyone feeling a part of the Hart family. Feeling weirdly shy, he tries to argue about it, but faints midway. Fate wakes up at night with a message on his bedside to rest for the next day. He asks Greed why his situation got worse as compared to before. Greed tells him that once the Gluttony skill gets the taste of souls, there's no stopping it. So, Now Fate must keep consuming souls to become stronger as well as feed his skill, or he dies and starts attacking anyone who comes in his way like a maniac. He also tells Fate that the hunger will be visible in his eyes once it reaches its limits, hence the current red in his eyes. His red eyes even provide him with a hunger boost skill that gives him better night vision, a heightened sense of smell, and an ability to immobilize weaker prey by terrorizing them. So, when Fate faces the goblins, they stand still, awaiting their death. With his unsatisfied stomach, he heads forward to the hobgoblin forest. It takes him quite a lot of hunting to satisfy his gluttony, and the only way to not have this feeling again is to not get himself this hungry by hunting now and again. Before leaving, Fate witnesses a goblin king walking by. He only has one good skill, health regeneration, but this one skill is quite useful for the boy who hasn't attained much strength yet. After successfully killing the king, Greed asks Fate to hand over all his stats to it so it can upgrade its first level. Fate seems to not have grasped the concept of why this sword is called the Greed, since he's shocked at this demand. But since Fate only has this sword as a partner, and he'll lose it if he doesn't give it its stats, Fate agrees. Greed upgrades into a fancy magic bow that has magic arrows drawn out of it that can go anywhere once the target's locked. We transition back to the Hart family living grounds, and Fate stops a suspicious lady from going out of the mansion, only for it to turn out to be Lady Roxy in disguise. It's quite unreal that she wasn't identified, just because of her tying her hair and wearing commoner clothing. She tells Fate that she's going out as a commoner for some secret inspection. Fate is about to leave after assuring he will keep his mouth shut, only for Roxy to grab him by the collar and ask him to tag along with her. Roxy seems to walk around carelessly, making Fate comfortable with calling them by their real name while in disguise, which is then pointed out by both Greed and Roxy. She tells him to call her Lexi, but something said by Greed makes him to tell it to shut up. Roxy seems to have taken it personally, but Fate apologizes for his words. Random teasing words by Greed make Fate blush, and almost heard it, but Roxy stops him from letting him disrespect his weapon. This also makes her take a good look at his sword and offer it to get maintained. Fate gets even more annoyed at Greed for basking in the moment Roxy got to touch it. The two walk around the market and taste the grapes that were sold by her own family, making her call them delicious for being grown at home. This almost gets her in trouble until Fate discovers that her relative works there. This was the idea of Greed, since Fate seems to be thoughtless in moments of need. But the same Greed gets him into trouble when a holy knight walks by and he makes Fate talk to him. This gets the bratty knight annoyed, and he starts insulting Fate, almost hitting him after Fate's multiple apologies. Roxy steps in before the knight can hurt them, which gets her some unwanted attention, and finally some rational people start seeing that she looks a lot like Roxy. Greed saves them by suggesting they act like lovers. Roxy then starts talking randomly about cooking breakfast for Fate, and him not eating it, and takes him away while in a quarrel. This saves them, as people are sure a holy knight can never know how to cook. The two hide in an alley, and Fate reads her thoughts of never linking arms with a boy before. He abruptly steps back, thinking about how this escorting thing is getting hard. Some gems catch her eye while there too, which she takes a liking to some ores, which are based on luck if they'll be empty inside or not. Fate can tell if they hold anything or not because of his skill, but Greed tells him to be discreet about it. As they walk, they overhear a conversation about the possibility of a monster entering the suburbs, as there have been goblin dead bodies around. But the question about the orphanage receiving the king's ears remains. Roxy tries to pry around, but the men tell her to ask the warriors about the details. She requests Fate to take her to the warriors' gathering. It turns out her entire investigation is about not letting the wandering monster enter the capital. They both later walk into the bar and sit in Fate's usual spot, while the bartender tells them to not take up the space of his dead usual customer without looking up. He's surprised that Fate is alive and apologizes. The bartender assumes Lexi is his girlfriend, making both of them nervous. The shyness makes them break the cups in their hands, which should be normal for Roxy, but a good thing for Fate as it shows he's improved in his stats. The man updates Roxy about the same rumors, also mentioning how it will be bad for the business as warriors won't want to travel the goblin terrain at the possibility of an unknown monster lurking there. Old Ad enters the bar and almost faints, thinking it's the ghost of Fate. The two were certain that Fate died. Old Ad also enters the conversation and adds that the Holy Knights are planning to take direct action about this situation. Fate gets anxious about having to face Roxy, as she joins the other knights by any chance while Roxy tries to make excuses for her random interest in the weird monster. Her investigation seems to have achieved its success. Some traveling warriors enter the gathering and try to hit on Roxy, only for her to casually touch one of them and send him flying across the room. Everyone knows such strength is only owned by holy knights, which Roxy herself reveals by opening her tied hair. The warriors bow down in apology while the bartender seems to have gotten a hint of that already. The warriors offer her their money in apology, while Roxy expresses her guilt, feeling ashamed that people have started fearing Holy Knights this much and are offering them their money. She wants the Holy Knights to be considered as protectors of people, as it's a shared dream of hers and her father's. Old Ad is impressed by how much her ideologies resemble her father, while Fate is also fascinated by her as she blends in with those warriors and promises to himself to stand by her until she achieves her dream. After getting Creed through some maintenance, which serves as a full-body massage for the sword, the two walk down the street, while talking about the Vlerics not informing her about the hunt. Ironically, they come across the most dreaded Holy Knights right away. The Vleric siblings are bullying a kid into coming with them, while he resists. Roxy tells Haddo to stop, and is more dejected upon seeing Mimile participating in the oppression too. She asks Fate to take the kids to themselves, and questions Raphael for not informing them about the hunt. He makes the excuse of her being busy in thoughts of her departed father, but she shuts him up. The siblings leave while the kid mocks them from behind, expressing his hatred for Holy Knights. Roxy apologizes to the kid, confusing him as she doesn't know she's also a Holy Knight since she isn't wearing her uniform. The two walk around to find the lost kid's mother and feed him, reminding Fate of there being a Holy Knight who helped him the same way when he first came to the capital. He wonders how that lady is right now. Roxy even offers to have the kid stay with them if they don't find her mother, but they end up coming across her before the day ends. Fate is in awe, seeing how happy and fulfilled Roxy looks after getting the kid safely to his mother. The two then get an earful from Haru once they get back, but Fate is happy he now has a family. In his room at night, Greed gives him the idea of buying a perception warping magic mask to not have Roxy identify him if she comes out to hunt the monster, as the mask makes the person look different to whoever sees them. He even gets her a filled ore as a sign of gratefulness to consider him a part of their family. Roxy is delighted and offers him a year full of meat or a whetstone to sharpen his sword in return, which excites Greed, but Fate politely declines. The not-so-holy knights have a meeting behind Roxy's back to discuss the execution of Gallia, to which we'll conclude today's video. Thanks for watching, and don't hesitate to comment for part 2. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe for more content. Also, remember to hit that notification bell so you never miss out on the latest updates. Stay tuned for our next video, and until next time, take care.